Accountability has always been one of those words that politicians love to use but rarely demonstrate when the spotlight turns on them. Pam Bondi was no exception. Over the years, she had built a reputation as a strong, articulate figure, a former attorney general who spoke often about integrity, ethics, and the importance of maintaining public trust. She had stood on countless stages speaking about law and justice, framing herself as someone who always stood for what was right. But on that day in Congress, those same words would circle back to test her. And sitting across from her was the one person who seemed determined to hold her to them, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. When Jasmine began her questioning, she didn't come across as combative. Her voice carried the tone of someone who respected the process but understood the power of truth. She didn't rush her words or raise her tone. She simply laid out the facts. Ms. Bondi, she began softly, you've spoken about the importance of ethical leadership, but the record shows several donors received special treatment during your time in office. Can you explain how that aligns with your message of accountability? For a moment. The air in the room thickened. Pam straightened her shoulders, her eyes briefly scanning the committee table before settling back on Jasmine. She answered, as she always had, measured, confident, the kind of response that had worked for her in dozens of interviews before. Those claims were politically motivated, she said. I've always followed ethical standards and upheld the law. But Jasmine wasn't interested in rehearsed answers. She had come prepared. Slowly, she began to read from official documents, each one carrying the weight of verifiable detail. Names of donors, corresponding actions, decisions that appeared to favor those who had offered financial support. Every page turned with quiet finality. Pam's face changed almost imperceptibly at first, the kind of shift you only notice when someone realizes that the conversation has moved beyond talking points. Jasmine's approach wasn't to embarrass her or to make headlines. It was to make her face her own words. Accountability, after all, isn't about perfection. It's about being honest when mistakes surface. For years, Pam had told audiences that the strength of public service lies in transparency. But here she was, being asked to live by that same standard, and it was proving difficult. She could no longer rely on old defenses or political rhetoric. Each piece of evidence Jasmine presented chipped away at the polished image Pam had carefully maintained. And yet, what made that exchange powerful wasn't Jasmine's persistence, it was Pam's reaction. As the questions continued, her voice softened. Her posture lost its firmness. For the first time, she looked less like a public figure and more like a person wrestling with something internal. There was no anger, no shouting match. Just the uncomfortable truth that accountability had come knocking. Accountability isn't meant to humiliate, it's meant to remind. Jasmine Crockett embodied that idea in the way she conducted herself. She didn't use sarcasm or grandstanding. She used documentation and reason. She let the facts speak for themselves. And that's what made the moment so striking. She was holding someone to their own principles, not out of rivalry, but out of respect for the institution and the people it serves. As the hearing went on, Pam's tone shifted further. The confident cadence of her earlier statements gave way to hesitation when she finally admitted, quietly, that she would take responsibility if mistakes were made. It wasn't a prepared line. It was the first honest thing she had said that day. It wasn't a full confession, but it was the beginning of acknowledgement. A rare glimpse of humility in a place where pride often reigns. For those watching, it wasn't a moment of victory for one side or another. It was a moment of clarity, a reminder that accountability is not just a word for press conferences or campaign slogans. It's a standard that must apply equally, even to those who once enforced it. Jasmine Crockett didn't just expose a contradiction. She revealed the true meaning of integrity, standing firm on truth, even when it challenges someone powerful. Pam Bondi came to that hearing, expecting to defend her record. Instead, she was confronted with what accountability really looks like, and how it feels when the lens of scrutiny turns inward. It was quiet, it was uncomfortable, but it was real. In that chamber, amid the silence that followed Jasmine's final question, accountability stopped being a talking point and became something tangible, something undeniable. Jasmine Crockett didn't arrive at the hearing to make a scene or trend online. She arrived prepared. Every page in her binder, every tab and highlight, had a purpose. In politics, preparation often separates those who perform from those who persuade. And on that day, her preparation did more than expose contradictions. It restored faith in the idea that facts still matter more than theatrics. Pam Bondi had always been known as someone who could command a room. She had the background, the experience, and the voice of authority that made people listen. She came to Congress expecting to hold her ground, to speak eloquently about ethics and the importance of integrity in public life. Her opening remarks reflected confidence, and for a while, it seemed she would sail through without resistance. But then came Jasmine's turn. She didn't raise her voice or rush her words. She took a slow breath, looked directly at Pam, and began with what seemed like a simple question. Ms. Bondi, she said, you've emphasized the need for accountability. but your record shows instances that appear inconsistent with those values. Would you like to clarify? Asterisk, it wasn't the question itself that changed the tone of the hearing, it was the calm certainty with which it was asked. Pam answered smoothly, leaning into the familiar language of defense. Those claims were politically motivated and have been addressed. She smiled faintly, believing she had diffused the challenge. Asterisk, but Jasmine was just getting started. She opened her binder, revealing documents that had been meticulously organized. She had financial disclosures, email exchanges, and state reports, each carefully She didn't read them with drama. She presented them with precision. The facts didn't need embellishment. They carried their own quiet authority. Asterisk, Pam's expression began to shift. The rhythm of her responses faltered. Her confidence, once unshakable, now seemed to wobble as Jasmine methodically walked through each inconsistency. Every statement Pam had made in defense of her record now faced a mirror held up by evidence. Asterisk. The brilliance of Jasmine's approach was its restraint. She didn't interrupt. She didn't editorialize. She simply asked, "So, when this donor contributed to your campaign, and your office later declined to pursue a related investigation, would you still consider that an ethical process?" The question wasn't aggressive. It was exact. It left no room for performance. Asterisk, Pam tried to redirect, as many witnesses do under pressure, but Jasmine kept bringing her back to the facts. Her preparation allowed her to anticipate each pivot, each rhetorical escape route. Every time Pam tried to move away from the specifics, Jasmine guided her gently back, using her own statements from previous interviews and reports. It wasn't confrontation, it was control. Asterisk, the power of preparation lies not in overpowering an opponent, but in outlasting them through substance. Jasmine understood that well. She didn't rely on emotion to make her point because she didn't need to. The evidence did the speaking, and the truth, when presented clearly, has a way of silencing even the most confident voices. Asterisk, as the minutes passed, the room grew quieter. The tension wasn't explosive, it was heavy, deliberate. People weren't watching a clash of personalities. They were witnessing the difference between assumption and proof. Pam Bondi's expertise in rhetoric met Jasmine Crockett's command of detail, and it was the detail that prevailed. Asterisk, Pam began to realize that she wasn't facing an opponent who wanted to embarrass her. She was facing someone who respected the truth too much to let it be twisted. That's what preparation does. It protects credibility. Jasmine's calm persistence stripped away the comfort of vague answers, forcing Pam to confront specifics. Asterisk, at one point, after another exchange of documents, Jasmine looked up and simply said, "I'm not here to debate character, Ms. Bondi, I'm here to clarify facts." It wasn't said harshly, but it landed like a gavel. The message was clear. This wasn't personal, it was procedural. Asterisk, Pam's demeanor softened. Her rehearsed lines began to fade, replaced by longer pauses and quieter tones. Preparation had disarmed her in a way that aggression never could. It didn't humiliate her, it humbled her. For perhaps the first time in her public life, she was facing not an adversary, but a mirror held up by truth. Asterisk, by the end of the exchange, Jasmine hadn't raised her voice once, yet she had done what few could. She shifted the balance of power in the room without theatrics, just by being ready. Her preparation was her armor, her evidence was her language, and her composure was her statement. Asterisk. In a world where political hearings often devolve into shouting matches and Jasmine Crockett reminded everyone that intelligence and preparation still hold weight. She proved that when you come armed with facts, you don't need volume, you need clarity. And that clarity, on that day, left Pam Bondi with little to say at all. Asterisk. When Pam Bondi walked into the congressional hearing that morning, she carried the poise of someone who had been through hundreds of hypersure moments. Cameras were nothing new to her. Questions from lawmakers, reporters, or critics, she had faced them all before. She knew how to stay composed, how to deliver her message with confidence. But this time was different. There was something about Jasmine Crockett's quiet, methodical tone that cut through the usual political noise. It wasn't about making headlines or scoring points. It was about truth. And when truth entered the conversation, Pam's polished armor began to crack. Asterisk, as Jasmine laid out document after document, detailing the inconsistencies in Pam's testimony, the tension in the room grew heavier, not louder. There was no shouting, no dramatic exchange. What unfolded was something far more humane, a confrontation not just between two women, but between pride and vulnerability. Pam had always prided herself on her composure. She was known for her ability to stay calm even when the criticism was harsh. But as Jasmine spoke, something shifted in her expression. Her eyes lost that sharp focus that usually came with control. Her voice, once steady and strong, began to waver ever so slightly. Asterisk, the moment wasn't about defeat, it was about realization. It was the realization that sometimes the narratives we build around ourselves start to crumble when we're faced with the truth we've been avoiding. Pam wasn't facing a political opponent that day. She was facing the version of herself that had long believed she was untouchable. Jasmine wasn't cruel or confrontational. She was factual, calm, and patient. She spoke with the authority of someone who had seen enough to know that integrity means more than public image. Asterisk. Each question Jasmine asked peeled back another layer of confidence. Ms. Bondi, she said at one point, you've often spoken about accountability. When you made these decisions involving campaign donors, did you ever question how that might look to the people you served? It wasn't an attack. It was an invitation to reflect, to acknowledge, to be human. Pam took a slow breath before responding. I believed I was acting within the law, she said softly, but perhaps I should have been more careful. Asterisk, that single sentence changed the tone of the entire hearing. For the first time, Pam's voice wasn't that of a politician defending herself. It was the voice of a person acknowledging imperfection. The silence that followed wasn't one of judgment, but of recognition. Everyone in that room saw something rare in Washington. Honesty stripped of spin. Asterisk, human. Vulnerability in politics is often seen as weakness. But in that moment, it became strength. Pam's breakdown wasn't loud or theatrical. It was subtle, the kind of emotional crack that appears when the weight of years of expectations finally meets reality. Her eyes welled slightly, not out of embarrassment, but out of exhaustion. She had built a career out of being strong, out of never backing down. Yet now, she was realizing that true strength sometimes comes from admitting when you've fallen short. Asterisk. Jasmine Crockett didn't gloat or press harder. She simply nodded, allowing Pam space to breathe. There was a kind of mutual understanding between them, a quiet acknowledgement that even those who preach accountability can lose sight of it. And in that acknowledgement, the power dynamic shifted. It was no longer about who was right or wrong. It was about what it means to be human in a world that demands perfection. Asterisk. Pam looked down for a moment, her hands clasped tightly together on the table. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She was reflective. The room, filled with reporters and officials, suddenly felt intimate, as if the entire world had paused to witness a moment of truth. For years, she had stood before cameras, arguing for justice and integrity. But on that day, sitting under the bright congressional lights, she was learning what those words truly meant on a personal level. Asterisk. There's a rare stillness that fills a room when pretense gives way to sincerity. That's what everyone felt when Pam finally looked up again, her voice low but steady. If mistakes were made, she said, then I will own them. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't defensive. It was real. Asterisk. For Jasmine, it wasn't about winning an argument, it was about restoring honesty to a process that had long lost it. For Pam, it was a humbling reminder that even those who have enforced the law can find themselves humbled by it. Her breakdown wasn't a collapse, was a reckoning. A human reckoning that revealed how even the strongest among us can stumble when faced with the mirror of truth. Asterisk. Transparency is one of those ideals that sounds simple in theory but becomes complicated when tested in real life, especially in politics. For Pam Bondi, it had always been part of her public message. During her years in office, she often spoke about the importance of openness, about how the public had a right to know the truth behind government decisions. She stood in front of microphones, looked into cameras, and told citizens that honesty was the cornerstone of leadership. But on that day in Congress, those same words came back around, not as slogans, but as expectations. Sitting across from her, Jasmine Crockett was the embodiment of that expectation. Calm, precise, and unwilling to let vague answers replace accountability. Asterisk. As the hearing unfolded, Jasmine's questions dug deeper, each one crafted not to humiliate, but to uncover. Ms. Bondi, she began, you've built much of your public reputation on transparency, but when we review these records, they don't seem to align with that principle. Can you explain why certain communications and donations weren't disclosed in full? Her tone wasn't accusatory, just steady. She wasn't trying to score points. She was doing what transparency demands, asking for clarity. Asterisk. Pam hesitated. In that brief silence, the weight of her own words seemed to hang in the air. For years, transparency had been her brand, but now it was becoming her burden. Those matters were handled according to legal protocol. She finally replied, her voice steady, but her eyes shifting slightly. It was the kind of answer that worked for headlines, but Jasmine wasn't interested in headlines. Asterisk. She opened her folder again, flipping to another page of highlighted text. Respectfully, she said, the documents from your office show internal communication that suggests otherwise. These weren't disclosed until after the inquiries began. Wouldn't you agree that withholding such information conflicts with the very transparency you've spoken about? Asterisk. There it was, the quiet moment when ideals meet reality. Pam's expression softened. The practiced tone of certainty gave way to something more fragile. Transparency wasn't just a talking point anymore. It was a mirror reflecting what she had tried to keep unseen. The room grew still, and even those watching through screens could feel the tension between image and truth. Asterisk. Jasmine didn't push further. She simply waited. She knew that sometimes silence is the most effective question of all. Pam looked down at her notes, perhaps searching for a prepared line, but none seemed to fit. The truth about transparency is that it demands vulnerability. It doesn't allow for half-truths or deflection. It requires facing uncomfortable facts, even when those facts damage your reputation. Asterisk. Pam finally spoke, more quietly this time. There were oversights, she said, and perhaps I should have been more forthcoming. It wasn't a confession, but it was an acknowledgement, and in politics, that's rare. Her words carried the tremor of realization. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was confronting herself. Transparency had turned from something she demanded of others into something she had to demonstrate. That transformation was painful to watch, but it was also powerful. For years, public officials have used the word as a shield, something to say rather than something to live by. But Jasmine's questioning turned it into something tangible, something that couldn't be faked under scrutiny. The most striking part of that exchange wasn't Jasmine's composure or Pam's vulnerability. It was the way truth filled the space between them. There was no spectacle, no shouting match, just the slow, inevitable unveiling of facts. It reminded everyone that transparency doesn't thrive in noise. It thrives in quiet honesty. Pam's breakdown, subtle as it was, came not from embarrassment but from understanding. The very principle she had once used as a measure of others was now being used to measure her. And for the first time, she couldn't control the narrative. Her words had built expectations she could no longer meet. Transparency, in its purest form, isn't about exposure, it's about ownership. And ownership is hard when the truth reveals cracks in a carefully constructed image. Jasmine Crockett, through her calm and measured tone, showed what real transparency looks like in action. She didn't demand perfection. She demanded truth. And by doing so, she reminded everyone watching that the public doesn't expect their leaders to be flawless. They expect them to be honest. Pam Bondi's silence in that moment spoke louder than any argument could. It was the sound of someone realizing that transparency isn't a slogan you repeat when it's convenient. It's a standard you have to live by, even when it exposes what you'd rather hide. When the hearing finally concluded, the atmosphere in the chamber was unlike most political proceedings. There wasn't the usual chatter or grandstanding that follows a tense exchange. Instead, there was a kind of reflective silence, the kind that comes when people witness something genuine. Pam Bondi slowly gathered her papers, her face calm but distant, as if her mind was still replaying the moments that had just unfolded. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett quietly closed her binder, her expression composed and steady. She hadn't sought to embarrass anyone, only to uncover what needed to be seen. In the hours that followed, clips from the hearing began circulating online. Some viewers focused on Pam's hesitation, others on Jasmine's precision, but beyond the political noise, something deeper resonated. People weren't just watching another congressional confrontation, they were watching a moment of truth unfold in real time. For once, it wasn't about ideology or party loyalty. It was about accountability, preparation, humanity, and transparency, the very values that should define public service. Pam's quiet breakdown, though uncomfortable to watch, became a rare reminder that even the most seasoned officials are still human. Beneath the titles and talking points, they too can feel the weight of truth pressing down. It's easy to speak about integrity when everything goes smoothly. It's much harder to live by it when the questions get uncomfortable. That day, Pam learned that truth doesn't crumble under scrutiny, only narratives do. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, emerged not as a victor, but as a symbol of what integrity and leadership can look like. She didn't seek applause or headlines. Her strength came from restraint, from letting the evidence speak for itself. She represented a new kind of politics, one grounded not in performance, but in principle. Her calm persistence reminded everyone that power doesn't always come from volume. Sometimes, it comes from clarity. As the cameras packed away and the lights dimmed, both women walked out of that room changed. Pam left with the awareness that public image means little without honesty to back it up. Jasmine left having demonstrated that truth, handled with patience and preparation, can still cut through the noise of politics. Together, their exchange reminded the nation of something many had forgotten, that transparency isn't about tearing people down, but about lifting the standard for everyone who serves. In the days that followed, commentators debated the hearing, trying to spin it into partisan narratives. But those who truly paid attention saw something beyond politics. They saw accountability tested and humility emerging from confrontation. They saw that transparency, when pursued sincerely, isn't about exposure, it's about growth. Pam Bondi's composure had finally met its match in truth, and Jasmine Crockett's quiet strength had proven that honesty still has power in a world full of pretense. It wasn't a story of victory or defeat, but of transformation. And long after the hearing faded from the news cycle, that moment continued to echo a quiet lesson that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, will always find its